We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that we really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisade's Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is the other Tom Luongo, producer of the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter and blog, editor at Newsmax Ultimate Wealth Report, and contributor to the Financial Intelligence Report. Tom, thanks for joining me today. Always a pleasure to speak with you, sir.
As always, Tom, I'm really glad you reached out the other day to set this up. It's been a little while since you and I chatted.
Absolutely. As I was kind of telling you before we hit record, I always try to be very judicious with the use of your time. And I really appreciate being able to, have developed the, for lack of a better word, the relationship with you that I have. I listened to a good amount of your stuff. And that being said, I think this time in history, this time in the year, this time in, all of our lives is very consequential, very important. And I don't think that there is, many better people to be able to speak to it than you. You have behind you all of the board games, all of the let's say tools that help build the mind and the strategies through which you see the world. So right. I don't necessarily know where we should start today.
Right.
Why don't we start with the debate that we just saw last week? We're going to get into the Chevron Deference, the debate, the election, the European elections, gold, how all of these things really fit together and show us the path forward and, some, as you called them, Six Sigma victories in a way that are extremely consequential to be able to understand. And I think, for lack of a better word, provide a lot of actual hope for people right now.
Maybe. I always preface a lot of this stuff with, look, this seems good, right? These things seem good, and they may be, but of course, with every move, there's always a counter move. And so you have to always think, okay, well, I made this great move, which puts pressure on them. So now what are they going to do in response? And then what are they going to do in response? And I'm a miserable two-player gamer because I don't particularly like two-player games very much. And so I don't really think in terms of that, move, counter move very simply. But even though I've kind of, in some ways, tried to devolve everything down into, well, it's us versus the commies, for lack of a better term. And so now I have to actually get out of my own comfort zone, which is to start thinking about things. I can balance a 5-player board much easier than I can balance a 2-player board in my brain, because you just find the weakest player or you find the right player and you work with them to then put forth your agenda, whatever that agenda happens to be, and you just think about things from multiple people's perspectives. Okay, so with all that out of the way, the debate. It's funny. The more I think about the debate, and Dexter White and I did a podcast the other day about it. I was allowing Dexter his time to do some Schadenfreude and nearly die from it. And as he put it, like, oh, this amount of Schadenfreude may actually kill me. But I was thinking about it this morning when I was recording for my weekly podcast for my subscribers over at Newsmax. I said, the debate has this relationship with the timing of it has a relationship with so many other things that are happening in the same time period. So it occurs on the night of the Thursday before the end of Q2 in the markets, right? The markets ended on Q2 on the next day on Friday. On that Friday, we have all of those cases come down from the decisions come down from the Supreme Court. Chevron, Trump versus the administration, blah, 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 blah. 2 days before that, or a day before that, we had the Jarkissi case against the SEC finally finish. And I think that one's almost as important as Chevron. And interestingly enough, I'm going to tell everybody that they should listen to Naomi Wolf's interview that she did with George Jarkissi, and to explain what happened and everything else. I think she does a really nice job of drawing the entire saga out for the layman, because she's a layman and she has a layman audience. So she, pulled him back from all the, hedge fund manager inside baseball, which,
I will try to put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, if you could, that would be great, because I really appreciated that. I even left a message, and I even left a comment on her blog, on her Substack, saying, "Excellent interview. Thank you very much for it." So the Jarkissi case, really important against the SEC, because it destroys the idea that they can create administrative courts and then deny people their Seventh Amendment right to a trial by jury. Like, there's all of these things that are happening. So you have Chevron, you have this, and it's all surrounding the debates. But at the same time, let's back up a couple of weeks. And everybody was asking the question, well, why did Rishi Sunak call for snap elections, which are happening as they just finished over in Britain? We're doing this on the 4th of July. And in the true spirit of American entrepreneurship, I'm working on the 4th of July. So, I'm like, okay, so why that? Why did Macron go for snap elections in France immediately? And I think it all had to do with, they knew, you have to understand now, everybody knew that Joe Biden had been completely decompensated and that he wasn't capable and he wasn't running the country. Everybody knew this. The idea that they could, like, all of a sudden realize that Joe Biden is non-compos mentis is ludicrous.
Well, sorry, Tom, to interrupt. I just want to add a point there. I tweeted actually after seeing the CNN coverage after the debate that we're watching orchestrated history being played out, right? It seemed like the narrative across all of the news channels was, it seemed like when, if you remember all of the synchronized news coverage brought to you by Pfizer, it actually reminded me a lot of that. And that's what I said. It reminded me very much of that. And it seemed very orchestrated to me. And the other point that you made about, everybody knew Joe Biden was, let's say senile. As Dexter pointed out in your guys' podcast, the left in a lot of ways sat in this insulated bubble that protected them from really realizing this in a lot of ways, I think. Right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. When I understand, and I've watched these people for years, and I did catch some of the CNN after debate coverage later on like YouTube and whatever. But Dexter watched it live, and he was texting me furiously, like, "Dude,
I did too. Yeah,
hey, turn this on. This is phenomenal." They're like melting down in real time. I don't think they actually knew things were as bad as they were until they actually saw it, because they live in their own little bubble, as I like to put it. They live in an echo chamber so small it would rent for $400 a month on the Upper East Side, right? And I do believe that that's real for certain members of the media, certain members of the what's how to put it, the I don't know, the intelligentsia, whatever you want to call them, and so they just really do believe that it's all just manipulated sound bites and they, because they live in that world of manipulation. So they manipulate the way they use Trump, right? Video of Trump, in the same way that they, of course, would expect that Breitbart and everybody else would manipulate video of Biden. And then they never actually go and watch the actual stuff, or never go to the press conferences or any of the other things. And then they always stage manage him really well so that they can maintain that illusion, even to the members of the press, for as long as possible. But I'm talking about members of the administration. They knew. And now they have the very difficult question surrounding them that they can't really get away from, which is that everybody knows you knew, and you didn't invoke the 25th Amendment. The cabinet should all be tried for treason right now.
Give us a quick explanation of what the 25th Amendment is. So well, just to kind of fill people in.
Yeah, no, the 25th Amendment was designed as a thing where if 2/3 of the cabinet, the vice president, clearly got together and said, yeah, this guy is not capable of discharging the office of the presidency, then we need to remove him from office and elevate the vice president. And there's a line of succession there, and the vice president immediately gets elevated. And so the cabinet, that's the cabinet's responsibility in this case. And it's a constitutional amendment. It's the law of the land. It's the high law of the land. And these people ignored it because they wanted to run their own agenda and continue on having a vacant presidency with a mushroom sporifying in the White House, as I've been saying for calling him for 3.5 years, just randomly signing on whatever. And it even calls into question who actually signed any of these executive orders or any of these bills in the law. Because did he actually sign any of them? Maybe he's got 2 to 3 hours a day of actual lucidity. But, given the fact that he's likely got vascular dementia, I'm not a doctor, but, that's the likely thing. That's what he's presenting as. And I talked to doctors about this, and I've talked to other people about it. And they're like, yeah, it's probably vascular dementia. And which fits with his history and medical history and everything else. So again, none of this is meant to even detract from Joe Biden. He's a pawn in all this. He's in many ways, he's a victim. I mean, I despise Joe Biden. I've always despised Joe Biden well before he ever became vice president. But at this point, what they've done to him now is just one long series of abuses of an elder, and it's disgusting, and so now let's back up to what I was saying before we went off track a little bit, which is saying the point I was trying to make, which is that why did they schedule the debate when they did? Well, it's clearly because if we've got a political crisis happening in Europe, the European parliamentary elections, which they knew the outcome of what those were going to be, then you schedule the French elections to not be finished until after Q3 starts. You schedule the British elections for the Thursday after Q3 starts. You allow all the banks, you allow all the central banks and all the hedge fund managers and all the 2 and 20 carried interest rate guys to file their quarterly reports, dress up their balance sheets, do whatever they need to do, get past quad witching day and all the financial market stuff, end Q2, put it in the books, and then they can start Q3 with a fresh slate, right? And if you have a political crisis happening in Europe, in the heart of Europe, France, the UK, even to a lesser extent, Germany, well, don't you want to foment a political clown world event in the United States to distract from that as well? So I can see why Davos, what I would call Davos, would have forced the debate there, knowing full well they were always going to, their strategy was to replace Biden with whomever, and we can have that conversation in a minute. But that was their move. The counter move by what I would consider sovereigntist forces within the United States that I've identified multiple times on your podcast and others, that would be Wall Street, the Federal Reserve, and others, saying, all right, fine, that's your move. We dump all of the SCOTUS decisions on the market the next morning while the world is waking up to the fact that Joe Biden is Joe Biden, like Matt Damon from Team America. And once you're in that mind, now it all happens all at once. And that's how you counter the whole situation. You go, oh, by the way, yeah, we have an old man with dementia as our president, and we're supposedly, descending into clown world. But we just took our government back because we just dismantled the administrative state that you people put in place 40 years ago with Chevron and in other ways in order to turn the United States first from a constitutional republic pre-World War II into a global empire from 1971 forward to a technocratic administrative state a la the European Union and or the USSR with Chevron in 1984. That was always the plan. And that plan just got dismantled, or at least the next phase of that plan just got dismantled. And Dexter and I were talking about privately. I think it was privately. We might have talked on the podcast about it. I can't remember now. He said, we said this stuff all has to happen in a particular order. First, you got to get SOFR in place and get control of the pricing of dollars. Then, at the same time, you've got to put a bunch of judges in place at the circuit court level to be able to allow a lot of these cases to filter up towards the Supreme Court. Then you can have the Supreme Court pull the big judo body slam and reverse everything. Those are the first 3 steps. There are all 25 or 30 other steps that have to be dealt with, but those are the 3 big ones. You have to do. I've always argued that it's, just like in many ways, just like Ron Paul said in 2008 and 2012 when he ran for president, it's like, I want to end the Fed, but I don't want to end it tomorrow. I want to end Social Security, but we made a promise to these people. We have to pay our bills. Like, so this whole idea that we should, just be vandals, and if they were vandals, we should be vandals, that's just 10 times worse. So it's about order of operations. And in that process, we, slice and dice the problem. And we look at it as, you can't build if it's a board game, you can't build your entire engine in one round. You've got to build it strategically over a variety of rounds. You've got to pick and assemble all the pieces the pieces of the puzzle in the first third or half of the game. And in the second half of the game, you run it until you outcompete everybody. I mean, that's generally the way a lot of these games like that are on my shelf behind me, that's the way they operate. Especially that one right there, by the way. It's a Wonderful World. Great game. Very short, 45 minutes. Brilliant engine builder. So like that's, I think, where we are. And so there's all these counter moves that are happening. And we're going to see how these things play out. But it's against the backdrop of Davos getting rolled here, because they, on the same day, then I saw the Wall Street Journal of all places. And once I saw it in the Wall Street Journal, I knew exactly what was happening. The Nuts and Sluts campaign against Klaus Schwab hit the Wall Street Journal. That's a big shot across the bow from Wall Street. They're like, oh, by the way, we have your number too, which is no different than when I told you of the last 2 years of Jamie Dimon going to Davos and telling everybody, expect 7% interest rates, expect more oil, expect more drilling. What are you, crazy? And then he goes to China and gets the red carpet rolled out for him while Anthony Blinken gets the janitor.
Well, I think that's
China's not subtle about this stuff, Tom. I mean, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that's, I think, again, this important point to really see who gets, who gets what, and who ends up, because of that who ends up being the ones that are actually controlling this stuff. There is, again, this idea that, call it the deep state, call it anti-Davos, whatever you want to call it, to be able to have all these decisions come down and the timing of all of these things, you can't tell me that it's not consequential or premeditated, right? And I think that tell is extremely important. And again, that, I guess, expression of power, for lack of a better word, or how that ends up kind of manifesting in these ways is, I think, a great thing to be able to see, because it means that there is still some common sense. There are people that understand what needs to happen and how it needs to happen for, to keep us from eating bugs and having, as you say, shitty toilets that don't flush.
Toilets that don't flush, light bulbs that drive us crazy, cars that suck, and and they want to make assisted suicide a growth industry. Like, what I mean? Like, it's just disgusting. Like, this is the way these people operate, and this is what they think we're just going to take. And I'm like, this is why we're doing this on July 4th. And it's funny. Like, I don't know that I didn't even set up today to grill out with my friends and invite people over or anything. Like, my wife and I are involved in about 18 other things that are on our heads. So we weren't really thinking in those terms for today. To me, it was it wasn't just another Thursday, but when I woke up this morning and I thought about it, and I thought about the work that, I could have blown off, for example, the podcast for Newsmax because it's a holiday and there's nobody in the office. But I'm like, nope, when they get back in the office tomorrow, there'll be a file for them to process, and, the subscriber should get their thing. I should work today. There's no reason not to. It always reminds me of Gary North. Every time the government declares a holiday, another day a holiday, he makes sure that he used to work on those days just to thumb his nose at the state. Nope, sorry. He even worked on Christmas, that guy, but Calvinist, what are you going to do? And I say that with nothing but love and respect. And it's an old joke within the Mises, the whole Mises group of people. So, when you really stop to think about it, this is, I think it's important that when you learn how to read the tea leaves on Capitol Hill, and I'll be honest with you, few people do it better than Dexter White. He's so good at it because he's been doing it his entire life, and he understands these people. really, really well, and he understands, which ones are the House organs and which ones aren't. And and he's not the only one. I know this, but it's like having Dexter as a resource on these things is it's just such a tremendous help to bounce ideas off of back and forth. I see things in the monetary space and the bond markets and whatnot. He sees things in the political space. We sit around, we jawbone, and then I do a podcast like this and try to synthesize it all and put out content that attempts to try and make sense of all this, right? And then inspire people to look at things differently, and then we have a conversation between us and the world. So now let's think about where we are, right? We don't know what's going to happen on Sunday in France. As always, the French political establishment are all circling the wagons to, prop up Emmanuel Macron as much as possible, the blunt Marine Le Pen. The French, you could argue that the French electoral system is designed to do exactly what it's always done, right? Maybe this is time it'll be different. I don't know. I'm hoping. It looks like Le Pen's got a really good shot at getting an outright majority. We'll see what happens. Today, I mean, once we get done with this call, Tom, you asked me before we started, what's your hard stopper today? I'm like, when the British exit polls really hit, because I'm going to be like glued to my Twitter feed for the rest of the day, and I've got to like charge up all my devices to make sure that they don't, crap out on me, because this is consequential. What if Nigel Farage comes out with the Reform Party and takes more seats than the Tories do? What if the Lib Dems take 85 or 90 seats as opposed to the 70 that they're projected to? What if Reform gets 75 or 80 seats? Keir Starmer will still get a majority, sure, in the UK Parliament, and maybe even a supermajority at that point, but he will not have it. It will be such a seismic shift. It won't really feel like an electoral mandate, because the minor parties will have usurped one of the major parties. And the Democrats in the United States are now staring at that same problem. Everybody on Capitol Hill right now is caught in a catch-22 thanks to the debate situation, which is as follows. I think it went out. Which is as follows. It's not like Kamala Harris wasn't in the weekly cabinet meetings and briefings and whatnot to know that Joe Biden wasn't all there. We've already discussed the idea that the cabinet is in effect was acting treasonously. And we all made a big deal about Alexander Haig, like taking over the government when Reagan got shot, right? Like, we have that. So we've had a coup. In that respect, it's been a coup, even regardless of what you believe about the 2020 election, right? How do they sell the idea of substituting Biden now because he's not compos mentis? And then we get President Harris. How can these people even make that switch without us going, but you let a mushroom run the country and bring us on the verge of nuclear war, as Tulsi Gabbard's been out there stumping like crazy, reminding everybody about for 3.5 years. You people have you've spent unbelievable amounts of money. You've allowed Janet Yellen to do yield curve control through the Treasury Department. You've attacked the Federal Reserve for operating the Fed the way they're supposed to, protecting U.S. banks and the primacy of the U.S. dollar. And you let a mushroom run the country. Well, really, you let his wife and the cabinet run the country. How are we supposed to trust you with anything? And you're going to just tell me, oh, don't worry about it. We're going to give you, I don't know, Michelle Obama or Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or whomever. Like, none of those people are acceptable, by the way. The likelihood is it's still going to be Kamala Harris because she's the vice president and you can't get around that. So that's the point that everybody needs to be really putting in their face and not letting the media try and immediately shift to, okay, who's Biden, who's going to replace Biden. And this is why tomorrow, George Stephanopoulos is going to try and prop Biden up in an all important interview where Biden gets to prove that he's not, he's not senile. Now, that's going to be difficult for them to do because they have to drug him up to do this. And if, depending on how long this interview goes will depend on how close they are to redlining him to keep him from like not stroking out in the middle of the interview. Mm-hmm. Like this is a sincere thing here. And so if he fails there, and he maybe he gets set up to fail, maybe they don't drug him up at all, and they set him up to fail, then what?
Again,
are we going to immediately just shift to Biden? No. You have to answer the question: How were you people so enamored of your own political position that you put your political position as the dominant party ahead of everything, and then ran with a special prosecutor who Clarence Thomas the other day literally said he's a private citizen. He's not even a special counsel. Like it's the whole thing is a complete farce. How are you people still functioning? Why aren't you in jail? Mm-hmm. Is the question we should all be asking. And this isn't a constitutional crisis. The Constitution's really freaking clear. People were supposed to do your damn jobs, and you didn't do it. So, well, that's what they're fighting, and that's why they gotta roll Biden out tomorrow in order to keep him, try and prop him up, because they know that if they don't do that, that's the question that's coming, and that's the question that's going to dominate from here forward, because that's what Trump is going to bang them on every freaking day. Mm-hmm. Because he understands the situation. He's not going to let them off the hook on this. He shouldn't.
Tom, it's interesting to me to, consider all of these moves and counter moves. Dexter made the point, let's say, against my point of orchestrated history being played out, that if they didn't realize this, they would have had a better plan and a better candidate to replace him in place already. Right? Like, I think that,
right.
That element of surprise on their part, and the fact that they weren't really, or they were kind of caught flat-footed with it, does, seem to suggest that they were surprised by it. But,
well, at least some of them, Tom. I'm not saying that.
Absolutely.
I think the puppet masters or the order makers, they knew exactly what their plan was. The order takers, like CNN, they were in the dark. Mm-hmm. So, but Pelosi was clearly in the know, for example.
Mm-hmm. But Tom, the one thing that I want to, or there was an interesting point that was brought up to me, which was that, something that I've had the discussion with you about before is maybe we're coming to the end of it, especially with all of these decisions by the courts, is that this might be the end of what I've dubbed the age of unaccountability. But who really likes or is really rooting for President Harris? And 25th Amendment or not, this seems to me to be a time where they can pick and choose who they actually want to put in, regardless of the laws that they're supposed to adhere to, i.e. the last 4 years, especially, let's say, in the States and in Canada, in Europe, all of these places that seem to just, again, adhere to this time of unaccountability. They can do whatever the hell they want. So, right. Martin Armstrong brought up to me, we spoke the morning of the debate before it happened, and he said that they're going to install Hillary instead of Biden. There's the other point that he brought up is this is a very predictable swing from left to right. And, to me, it's interesting to try to consider the cyclical nature of that, and then how you end up trying to control that, because you can see it coming.
Yeah, no, these are all really good points. And Marty's, and I don't discount, I my first thought was also that this was a setup for Hillary Clinton. And well before Marty even put his thoughts out there on paper. Which I read, and I didn't have a chance to listen to your interview with him, but I do read Marty's blog every day, and and I'm a subscriber over there to his private blog as well. So I get a lot.
Don't go looking for that interview on YouTube.
yeah, no, of course not, because you talked about things you're not allowed to talk about. I guess it's on Rumble, right? Just
everywhere else except
everywhere else, but but to Marty's point, there's a couple of things. about that. Because again, I brought this up to Dexter immediately, and he and I, then bandied it back and forth. We did the podcast we did after having a conversation about Hillary, and he's like, well, there's two things. Well, one, you're not going to pass up the vice president woman of color for an old white woman who already lost to Trump once, that everybody hates. That's one. You can't pull that one away. Or did you guys forget, the last, 75 years of American politics? That's one. What the rules are. And if you don't understand what the rules are and what the fundamentals are, then great, make that move, and then we'll watch Hillary lose again. It'll be even better. Like, oh my poor liver. There isn't enough rye whiskey in the world for this. But there's that. And then there's how does Hillary actually get the superdelegates? Because this is Joe Biden. It's not like he wasn't a vindictive prick when he had a brain, and now he's got vascular dementia. And, one of the hallmarks of dementia is that for, the random outbursts of hostility and virulence, like he would just turn around and go, no, you know what? I'm giving it all to Kamala. The hell with you people, So like, there's that. So he goes to so this is why the Stephanopoulos interview tomorrow, they're trying to get him through to the convention, and they can figure it out from there, because clearly Hillary has been doing the proof of life tour. She's been, standing up going, hi, remember me? And we're all like, yeah, we remember you. You suck. Yeah. And of course, since she maps nicely to the British neoconservatives, as opposed to the Lindsey Grahams and the John McCains and that wing, the Tom Cottons and all the Marco Rubios. And then you have for lack of a better term, the European or the Davos part of the Democratic Party, the Janet Yellens, the Barack Obamas, right? The Elizabeth Warrens. And then in the middle, you have somebody like Nancy Pelosi, who just likes power. And she actually represents the California wing of the Democratic Party that really has sold its soul to China ages ago, all downstream of Dianne Feinstein.
I think a perfect way that you guys frame this is that personnel equals policy, right? Dexter said he bases his predictions on the pathology of these people versus what should happen, what they think should happen. And I think that is an excellent way to look at this. Again, if you understand how these people think, rather than what they should do for your feelings, according to your feelings, that maps far better onto the reality that ends up, crystallizing, rather than what you want to happen. And again, that goes to your point that you and I have spoken about before, of living in and understanding the reality that you're actually in versus the reality that you want.
You want to be in. Well, this is why I looked at personalis policy. Bernanke, Ivy League educated, ivory tower academic, never held a private job in his life. Janet Yellen, kind of similar story. Jerome Powell, private equity guy, worked in the real world, 8th generation American, traces his lineage back to, Virginia. Like, seriously, like Powell is not cut from the same cloth as the rest of these people. And so it makes sense that you could at least construct an argument to see whether or not he fits that bill as to would his behavior be different. Not saying that it means his behavior is going to be different. It means that you have a model that you can then fit data into to see if the model holds. Mm-hmm. And so far, my model of Jerome Powell has held just fine, especially when he went to the ECB, walked into the ECB's house yesterday and basically told Lagarde, that's nice. Inflation expectations in the United States, we don't see them coming down to 2% for at least a year and a half to 2 years. 25 and 25
higher rates for longer.
Mm-hmm. Means higher rates for longer. And then they get questions from the audience, from members of the press who are normally never given the opportunity to ask those questions of Lagarde. And I'm like, okay, so who let her in the room? Like, again, another tell. Like people, because my patrons, my really active ones on our Slack server, were all watching this live. I was too busy yesterday; I couldn't really watch it, so I got all kind of secondhand. And they were all like, "Oh my god, this is like the best thing ever!" Like, we're not enough popcorn, right? And then they're going through some of the things that happen, and some of the people who ask questions, I'm like, and then my first response was exactly that. Like, who let her in the room? And everybody went, oh, you're right. Like, exactly. So, so it's a lot of, I mean, this is one of the great things about what we've built, is that I get to act just like I used to act on when I hung out on, like, Turd Ferguson's site or Yahoo Finance or whatever. I just hang out as one of the guys, and we just do the thing, and we just sit and chat, in an honest to God comment server, and just have a good time. And everybody's kind of equal. And I mean, I know my voice carries more weight in the room than everybody else's, but you know what I mean? We still get to just do that. And that becomes that's a really way, one, it's a great way to remain grounded. And two, it's a great way to keep connected and bouncing ideas off of each other and everything else. So, you're not just like doing your thing on a daily basis and you show up in front of a microphone and do the thing and pontificate. I'm good at that, but it's not really particularly engaging after a while if you don't keep on top of things, right? So so when you stop to think about all of that, there's Powell doing that to Lagarde yesterday. That's higher for longer in so many words. It's, oh, by the way, we control your own room at the ECB. And it's like Powell doubling down like he did in 2021 at the Green Sea Summit, when, she came out and said, we're going to orient the world's monetary policy for climate change. And Powell stood up and went, I'm not. And, like the guy from Life of Brian, we're all individuals. No, I'm not. Like, that guy. And right. And like, that was Powell, like, I have a dual mandate, and then climate change isn't part of that. So, and then Lagarde just lost her mind. And so like, they're really good at fronting inevitability. These people, they're really good at just sticking to their script and, ignoring everything around them and just doing their thing. And that's what they are. People like von der Leyen and Lagarde and Kaya Kallas and all the rest, that's what they do. And Draghi was the same way when he was in charge. So, but that doesn't mean that it's real. So that's the level of competence you have from the personnel, right? So again, go back to how you can tell what's happening here. You have these people, you understand how venal they are, you understand what their agendas are, and then you go, oh, this is what they're doing. So let's roll it all back. So was this a thing for Hillary Clinton? Maybe it was Hillary's last play. But mechanically, how does Hillary grab the nomination at the convention? That's an open question. I'm not saying that it's not possible that she can do it. I'm saying that the odds are really against her. They're not in her favor, because all Kamala Harris has to do, I think I tweeted it out the other day, is like, all she has to do is stand there like Putin and just go, yeah, that's nice. I'm not doing, that's nice. No, that's nice. No, yeah, okay, fine. You killed another 20 people, sunning themselves on the beach of Sevastopol. Still not going to nuke London. Not going to give you your casus belli. Like, I'm not doing it. And the same thing with Kamala Harris, what I've been saying and what Dexter and I have both been saying for like 2 years behind the scenes. Like, we've been talking about this for forever and a day. And I've talked about it in some of the private gold, ghosts, and guns stuff. He's like, look, she holds all the cards. She sits up in the Naval Observatory and she says, I'm taking offers. Okay, so now let's talk about Kamala Harris's cards. I've already talked about the one area she's really weak, and it's not her being an idiot, by the way. It's that she was in the cabinet meeting rooms with everybody else, and she's just as guilty as the rest of the cabinet of holding on to the Biden fiction for all this time. But what if she says, well, there was nothing I could do about it. The cabinet was never going to get rid of him, and it takes 2/3 of the cabinet to move him. So I was like, yeah, I knew this. She could just literally come clean and go, look, I tried, but I couldn't do anything about it. And she could sell that, right? Especially if she sells that to the GOP to say, look, we need to start a 25th Amendment thing here in some way. We need to get the cabinet to do their job, and I've got this lined up. Let's get this done. And if they won't do so, if she was smart after tomorrow's interview, she would come right out in front of this and go, look, I've been trying to get rid of Biden for 9 months now, but I couldn't do it because Blinken and just literally name names, because Blinken and Jake Sullivan and Yellen and all the rest of them wouldn't get rid of it. everything changes. She absolutely is the nominee, and not a freaking thing Hillary Clinton can do about it.
And it's
She
not like
gets
that
the-
necessarily changes the outcome of the actual election. It's just, a power move from here to there. And as you said, Tom, she's not an idiot. That like there is a reason why she is VP, right?
Right,
Even though you hear her speak and you think that she is a complete idiot.
Right. I mean, she might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but she's shrewd.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be smart to be shrewd. I've done a lot of shrewd, dumb people in my life. I've been, I've had dumb, shrewd people get one over on me in my life. It's not hard. Just because you're smart doesn't mean you're either rich or powerful or anything else. Like, is that the classic Batman the Animated Series episode where they introduced the Riddler, and it's called "If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich?" That's literally the name of the episode, and then it's the Riddler introduction, and the Riddler is played for as a second rate. He's played as a character who thinks he's a top tier villain, but really he's a third stringer. Mm-hmm. And that's like the story, and that's the theme of the story, and it's really great. But got news for you: like, these people are all the Riddler, but they think they're the Joker. Mm-hmm. And they're really not. So Harris has cards to play in this respect. She's not going to be, she can be president. You can do the 25th Amendment thing. She can run as the president, as the nominee, and she gets the participation trophy of being the first female president for 7 months. And then she gets the handoff to Donald Trump or Donald Trump's VP choice if they, assassinate Trump between now and January. This is why Trump's VP pick, one, hasn't been announced yet. And two, it's why it's still a thing. I think everybody's waiting to see how everybody moves to decide what Trump is going to do in terms of his VP pick, because he has options, right? And if, from what we've all seen in the last couple of weeks, certainly the last week or so, the opportunity here is for him to pick somebody who is not neocon deep state insurance, like George H.W. Bush was to Ronald Reagan, or Dick Cheney was to George Bush the Lesser, okay, or whatever, or life insurance for Barack Obama, right? In this respect, he could pick somebody actually competent to run the program, who's on board with the program to extricate the United States from this, frankly, junta, and, continue on the work regardless of whether Trump's actually in the White House or not. Notice how the Democrats have tried for the last week to float the talking point that Trump is actually worse than Biden is. Pelosi did this one. I saw it from 4 or 5 different people. I'm like, oh, and they tried shoehorning it in. Like, are you kidding me? Is there like their last little bit on their way out the door? I'm like, oh my God, seriously? Like, they're not even in the same ballpark. I'm not saying that Trump is, again, the sharpest knife in the drawer either, but compared to Biden, he's a Rhodes Scholar. I mean, and I even hate to invoke that term. That's just taking me back to my youth.
So Tom, let's move forward a couple months. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Is there a possibility to you that, the election is as easily controlled as, let's say, it was in 2020? And or, understanding this, let's call it at this point, this eventuality of a season 2 for Trump. What scares you about his economic policies, and could that reignite more inflation as well?
Sure. Okay. So now we'll move into let's get into the nitty gritty of why this is an economic show as opposed to a politics show. Mm-hmm. Trump is a mercantilist. He always has been. He always will be. Mm-hmm. It was the one thing I was worried about with him when he first got into power in 2016, when he won the election in 2016. I said, he's going to want protection tariffs and a cheap currency. Mm-hmm. He's going to try and put pressure on Powell to cut rates. He may even need at that point, and Powell may even need at that point to cut rates. I've said multiple times, if you want, before we do the Trump thing, one last point about Powell and Davos and what they're going to try and do between now and then. Clearly, they want to saddle Trump with a war that he doesn't want to fight, mm-hmm. and all of that. That's clearly part of their agenda. That's one. The second thing is that there's the potential for the political unrest in Europe to turn into a sovereign debt crisis if Powell keeps rates as high as they can. So what are we going to have here? We're going to have moments where they're going to use either the CDS market or SOFR or something like that to try and foment a crisis between now and then hope that that blows back on the United States and forces Powell to pivot. That's going to be their ace in the hole, is to foment some kind of October surprise in the capital markets in order to try and make this happen. And, identified with my friends over at Mittelchino in an episode of the episode of my podcast where we talked about the end of LIBOR being finally quoted and then ending, and then that being a very strong source of flows into City of London at a 30 to 50 basis point lather, rinse, repeat basis trade. Well, maybe. I mean, I go back and forth on this. I entertain the idea during the conversation with Marco. I'm not completely convinced of the argument, but he may be completely right. And if I'm, if my misgivings are, unfounded, fine. It's just then then it's a failing on my part to understand the nuance here. Perfectly reasonable. I put it out there for people to consider. So we have all of that. We have to think in those terms. And then what is that going to look like? So now we can already see that inflation is going to be coming back, Tom. Like, while they were freezing the markets in amber during the last 2 to 3 weeks of Q2, like currencies didn't move, the bond markets didn't move, the equity markets really didn't move. They moved up, and there was a little bit of volatility, but there's a lot of vol suppression happening across all the markets, with the exception of oil, which they pushed the price of Brent crude down into the mid 70s, and now it's trading back at 87. And then there was the short squeeze of copper, which pumped and dumped, but that's coming back as well. The minute we hit Q3, gold started to tick up again, silver started to tick up again, oil continued its rally, and we even had a 13 or 14 basis point sell off in the U.S. Treasury market on Monday. But then they've ring-fenced that since then, right? Coming into today's holiday. So you can see them really trying to maintain all of this, but oil's been the canary in the coal mine, telling you, no, commodity cost push inflation is coming back. There's no way around it. Powell sees this. He's not dumb. Okay. And that's going to put the ECB behind the 8 ball. They're going to want to cut again. When they do so, they're going to ignite inflation like you wouldn't believe. They've been holding the euro up.
Tom, when they did cut, that is something that I wanted to get to. When the ECB did cut, is that them, basically capitulating and say, Powell, you win, like we can't handle this anymore? Like, that's something that you have been focused on for a long time. Is this basically this battle?
Yeah, I think so. And, I wrote about it extensively for this month's newsletter, and I've talked about it in a couple of different places. And I think that divergence, right? Like the Robert Frost thing, two roads, I hate to use that. It's a trite, it's almost trite analogy at this point, but this is a divergence. Powell's going one direction. The rest of the Eurozone and everybody who's dependent on the Eurozone has already cut rates. Canada, Sweden, the SMB twice. Somebody else cut recently.
Canada.
The Czech Czechia, 50 basis points. And even the Bank of England wanted to cut, but didn't quite. Mm-hmm. So they were but the only ones who haven't cut yet are the United States and Japan. And Japan is actively allowing the end of yield curve control. They're just not getting out of the way fast enough. They're going to need to. Or the yen's going to go to 200, which is still a very high probability. So that divergence is important. And I think it is. I mean, you're kind of, it's a leading question, I get. That divergence is important because Lagarde didn't cut because inflation in the Eurozone is at 2%. I think even Powell said it at the meeting yesterday. He said, if we measured inflation the way you guys did, we would be at 2%. And he said it derisively. He didn't say it with any, he's like, if we measured it the way you do it, you're at 2%, but the way you do it is crap. And the way we do it is crap. But, so inflation expectations in the United States, which he reiterated is his marker for inflation, are still running 5.6% in the United States. So in no way is he going to cut. And is he going to allow a deterioration of the labor market? Yes. Is he going to allow a lot of bad commercial real estate debt to go busto? Yes.
Which also affects Germany, right?
Which affects Germany a lot, because their banks are heavily invested in American commercial real estate, because that's where they needed to get their 8% yield to pay their very generous pension system over there. And I don't think the French banks or the Italian banks are any different, though I think the Italian banks all invested in like Turkey before the hyperinflation. Oh my God. So, but when you think of it that way, it's very clear. Powell hasn't cut rates. I don't think he's going to even cut. He's not going to cut this month. He might cut in September if there's an exogenous event that forces him to do something. And they're going to try and force him into that. And, this is just classic kind of bullying and intimidation. Well, we're all cutting. And he's like, well, that's nice. You need to cut because your banks are all in trouble. And you're trying to keep credit spreads where they are. And like, about 5 or 6 weeks ago, when the U.S. German spreads pushed out to 2%, meaning German debt was trading at negative 200 basis points to American debt, I said, now Lagarde is panicking. She's overcorrected. This morning, we woke up this morning, U.S. German 10-year spread was down to 173 basis points. Gets below 170, it's going to 160, and then 150, and we're going to have another crisis. And once it gets below that level, then we know we're into like incipient crisis mode. And they're going to have to do something. There's going to be a policy change. What's she going to do? Cut again? Great, please. I dare you. A double dog dare you. Like, seriously. Like, come on.
Because that really facilitates.
Let's just get this over and done with quicker. Let's just push you out the pasture into the glue factory.
But does that end up really facilitating that flight of capital out of Europe back into the US? Which is something, again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If the credit spreads are tightening like that, if German debt is rising faster than American debt's rising, what does that sound? And again, that's why Yellen keeps trying to hold down the 10-year. That's why she did that buyback the other day of 20s, right? It was all 20s that she bought back the other day. She's trying to massage the yield curve down. She's constantly selling more 2s than 10s, all of that kind of stuff. Now she's buying back 20s. And I think a lot of commentators, they are so locked into this idea that the Treasury and the Fed are trapped and that they have no other option, that they can't see that they have options. Like, the Fed can allow a bunch of banks to go bust. It's part of the Fed's job to let the banking system clear out the garbage. Now, will it be horrific? Possibly. I don't have a good answer for that, but I know that you're not going to improve anything if you don't allow for some of the malinvestment to be worked off. What we're seeing right now, and like all of the economic data that I see coming out, is I just see reorganization of capital. We had all this capital deployed at 0%, and now it's being redeployed at 5.5%. It has to move around, and that means you're going to get a lot of conflicting signals in the labor market and the credit markets and all of this stuff. But I don't see any stress. I don't see any liquidity stress. I mean, there was a big deal was made yesterday, right before the election, about that bar chart posted. Oh, the SOFR hit 5.4%, and I immediately tweeted out. I went and looked at it. And I'm like, yeah, but it hit 5.39% in January. Nobody made any noise about that. Hit 5.38% last fall. No one made any noise about that. But all of a sudden, this 5 basis point move, and the tweet was really disingenuous because they blew it up such that you couldn't even read the scale. And then they focused on just the last 3 months. I'm like, oh, please, are you kidding me? And then everybody tweeted it out. Like, this is an operation, folks. This is chum being thrown at you. It's like, I almost wanted to look at it. Oh, guess what? I must be over the target again. This is why I'm like, yeah, immediately I replied to it and said, oh, by the way. Not a big, maybe we'll wake up tomorrow and the markets will open with SOFR at 5.5%. Maybe. And if so, then maybe we have some crisis. But let's not take a data point and go crazy. And because it's not a new trend. Again, we have a monumental event happening today. British elections. The collapse of the Tory party is in process. And you don't think that SOFR is not going to blow out 6 basis points 24 hours beforehand? You think that that's just like, is that air you're breathing? Like, you know, like everybody, I know everybody's on edge. I know everybody's, and I love the fact that everybody, and don't get me wrong, I love the fact that everybody's engaged. I love the fact that I had no less than 12 people send that chart to me yesterday, both as a DM and on Slack and as a retweet on Twitter. I'm like, okay. Oh, by the way, pan the chart out, look at the scale and go, okay, what does that mean? What does it mean? So, and then the next day and that was on the second, or this morning it was at 5.35. They came back down 5 basis points. I don't know if it's a crisis or not, but it's clearly not a big deal. It's still within the Fed's, target range of 5.25 to 5.5%. So until SOFR gets above 5.5% or is significantly higher than the 1 month or 3 month treasury, I don't really care. I didn't see anything in the SOFR futures market. Those have been as boring as, I chart that every day. The SOFR futures curve. I didn't see anything there. Didn't see anything in the treasury market that made me, go crazy. What I think everybody should be watching though isn't SOFR. Point being, go back to one of the things I wanted to talk about earlier to remind myself is go watch CDS spreads of various sovereign debts. So watch UK sovereign debt credit spreads, watch American sovereign debt, French, Italian, German, possibly others. This is where it's going to start. You're going to see somebody make a move in the sovereign debt credit default swap market to try and make the tail wag the dog. And everybody's going to take that bit, put it in their mouth and run with it because it makes for great copy. You'll see apocalyptic stuff on Zero Hedge. You'll see it on FinTwit. You'll see it everywhere. And now you got to ask yourself, who bought the insurance and why and for how much? And you'll never find that out because those are all effectively private markets. So you have to remember that, these things always have a real, there's always somebody out there trying to manufacture a crisis when their ox is being gored. And we know whose ox is being gored right now. So we should expect the usual suspects to dump $50 million into the CDS market and blow out French CDS spreads by 15 basis points and everybody trying to lose their minds. And then they'll run with the headlines and then they'll tell two friends, they'll try and get the markets to do their job for them after that. It's happened before. It'll happen again. And if it's a coordinated thing, great. So, all right. So I guess back to your original question about Trump, if he wins, inflation and all of that. Then I'll turn the microphone back over real quick. Trump is a mercantilist. He wants lower interest rates. I think Powell will give that to him when it's appropriate so that he can be the guy who, fixes everything. But in the meantime, what he has to do is ensure, Powell that is, that he breaks as much of the back of Europe and the Eurodollar markets as possible before that happens. And so strategically, if I'm Powell, I'm holding rates against Trump's will for as long as possible. And then someone just needs to tap Trump on the shoulder, take him inside and go, look, we have a plan. We're not going to make you look bad. We're going to make you look good. And this is how we're going to do it. But it's going to take a little longer than you think because, these people have a lot of money. But that's what I think. That's what I think is happening behind the scenes. I don't know if Trump's had that talk yet, if someone's tapped him on the shoulder yet. But I can tell from the way Wall Street is acting and how they're all turning on Biden, the signs are all there. So,
which is also interesting to consider. As funny as this sounds, in his 70s, that he almost presented a more mature version of himself during the debate. He seemed, a lot more withheld and strategic, if, not perfect, obviously, but much more strategic about how he used his words and his, outbursts or whatever.
Yeah, no, he knows what the stakes are this time. And he has a couple of opportunities here to present a different picture to swing voters in America than he has before. And he needs to project a relatively mature version of Trump. I think that's a very good point, Tom, that you brought that up. And then his VP pick has to be the right one. It has to signal and it has to cut across like 5 different competing agendas and find that center of the Venn diagram. Now, I happen to think it's Tulsi Gabbard,
right?
But it could be other people. I can tell you flat out that the way Gabbard is operating right now, she is absolutely gunning for at least a cabinet position in the Trump government, and good for her. And I'm in the middle of listening to her book right now. I can tell you flat out, she impresses me more and more as a person, because you can't fake this stuff. You just can't. So I like Tulsi, and I hope that that she's a lock for cabinet position. But VP, Dexter likes to run with the idea that Trump will never have anybody on the ticket with a longer last name than he does. So 5 letters is all we're going to get. There's a lot of people that fit that bill: Rubio, Scott, Flynn, all of them, right? Vance, right? It would have to be Tulsi. She'd have to be Trump Tulsi. It wouldn't
Tulsi G.
Yeah, exactly. Because it can't be 2 syllables. And it can't be Ramaswamy either. I mean, it can't be Vivek, because that would just overshadow Trump. And if that's the case, I mean, it's a silly thing, but I mean, I never discount stuff like that, because again, it goes back to Dexter's, I'd say even preternatural ability to read these people, to say, look, that's who he is, and that tracks with his personality. Personnel is policy.
So, Tom, let's spend a couple minutes, if you wouldn't mind, explaining the Chevron deference and what that actually means as well. Because I think, again, this is a very consequential, important piece for people to understand, and I think it's important to be able to spend, some time discussing it in a way that's digestible for the average person, because of the way that the 3-letter agencies, the alphabet agencies, however you want to say it, have been empowered to actually dictate policy, law, however you want to put that, rather than everything be passed more as a constitutional republic, rather than in some ways a dictatorship, right?
Sure. All right, let's start. Before we go to Chevron, I'm going to say, as an opening here, there's a very good article on Zero Hedge as of today, and it's about Liz Truss.
Okay.
So if you can find that for the show notes, Tom, you should write that one down, put that in the show notes, because Liz Truss's book, apparently, I haven't read it, but the great article about it, where she explained her entire career, she fought the British civil service. And I've talked to Alexander Mercouris about this at length over the years. I've talked to other people about this at length, that the British civil service is the real power in Britain. And the key figure for years up until Boris Johnson was Mark Sedwill. And Theresa May did a terrible thing by making him both head of the civil service and gave him and then gave him some other job that I can't remember now. But when she did that, it was like literally handing the keys to the entire country to a man who to ensure that the British deep state always got their way. And what the picture that Truss paints, apparently, is that no matter what they wanted to do in Parliament or she wanted to do as Prime Minister, didn't matter, because the agencies, the real decision making on British policy at every level was turned over to the equivalent of our 3-letter agencies here in the United States. Now, they can do that in Britain because they don't have a foundational document. They have an evolving constitution that is basically a body of law, right? So whatever Parliament passes becomes law. And then, so if they pass a law that says we're farming out monetary policy and banking regulations to this unelected group of technocrats over here, well, that's who runs the parliament. And there's nothing the Prime Minister or Parliament can do about it other than repeal that law and take it off the books. And I say this all as a preface. That's the British system. Well, Chevron was for all intents and purposes, implementing that system here in the United States. Mm-hmm. It's Chevron in 1984 was effectively the empowerment of the alphabet agencies to make or interpret law. Interpret law. Congress makes the law, but the judicial branch had to defer to the agencies of the executive branch to get these things and told the courts basically what the best practice was, and then the courts had to defer. So it put all of the real lawmaking in the hands of the alphabet agencies. So to put it in like one little digestible chunk, the courts, the judicial branch, had to defer to agents of the executive branch, the agencies, on the interpretation of badly written laws by the legislative branch, Congress. Once you understand that, you understand that Chevron was the most unbalancing piece of, or the legal decision of the three branches of government, arguably since Marbury versus Madison, which I'm probably overstating that, or even the Dred Scott decision. It was an immense power grab by the executive branch, because now executive branch could work with the legislative branch to write bad laws, because you can get a vaguely worded law through Congress because it's easy that way. But to actually make Congress like say, oh, no, we're not allowed to have more than a toilet that flushes more than 2.1 gallons. And we're going to write that into a law, and then we're going to make it a law. Well, guess what? It's a specific thing that can then be challenged in the courts. There's going to be this, and there's nothing the agency can do about it. So the legislature just says, we want clean water. And then the EPA or this one or that one says, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then the courts have to defer to that. So removing Chevron from that, overturning Chevron completely in a literally 3-word sentence, Chevron is overturned, period, no comma, is literally a restatement of the Constitution is now back in effect in this respect.
Which was, as I understand it, more than you were even hoping for with the Chevron decision.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely. I would never expected to see that. And I expected to see it weakened. To get it completely overturned and then have and Clarence Thomas has just been in fuego, to invoke Dan Patrick of ESPN, like unbelievably how brilliant. And to show so much character and so much strength in the face of a Democrat party and a left and a globalist cabal literally threatening all of their lives. Like this has been going on for months. Mm-hmm. So to stand up and just say that, and that tells me that somebody tapped the Supreme Court on the shoulder and said, don't worry about it. We have your back. Do your jobs. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise these things wouldn't have happened. So at least that's my interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Tom, again, where I think your expertise or your specialty is on this, what are the second and third order effects of Chevron being overturned?
Well, the first thing is that now Congress actually has to legislate. The executive branch actually has to delegate, and the courts get to review the constitutionality of all these rules. It also opens up that while the one thing that the Supreme Court did say was that none of the past decisions adjudicated under Chevron will be overturned, will be reversed, but they can be relitigated. Mm-hmm. And potentially people sue for damages, because they also said there's no statute of limitations now on these things as well. I think that's part of the Jarkissi case up against the SEC. And then the Jarkissi case is even more monumental, because now they can't use administrative law courts like this is France, for Christ's sake, because that's French administrative law as opposed to English common law, right? We literally have, we were literally living under that kind of system with these two, with this in place. So the second, third order effects are as follows. We can have toilets that, all of these things have to be now incorporated by legislation into law. So now Congress has to pass an omnibus bill or a bill that says, okay, everything ever legislated under Chevron, all of those decisions are now law of the land. And they can do that. Are they going to do that? Are they going to be capable of doing that? Are they going to be able to get that done? That's a good question. Are they going to be able to do it now that it's nearly the end of the legislative session?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the timing on this is immense. I don't think there's time to get this done. And so there's that. It means that if Trump were to win in the fall, it means that Trump can, by executive order, stay all of this stuff. Okay. I think there's, and at a minimum, that I think is where we go. We go right back to, like, now, for example, one of my pet peeves is CAFE, the corporate average fleet economy, because I'm a car guy and know this well. CAFE is actually law. It was actually written by Congress, but Trump just, executive order. First thing he did on day one in 2017 was to delay any further implementation of CAFE. Gave us 4 extra years without, this push to EVs nonsense. I expect the car industry to lobby the living hell out of Trump to get rid of it completely, and the incoming Congress to get rid of it completely, because they're losing their asses on these cars and the EVs and all the rest and every other aspect of this. Like, so there's that, like, the doing away with incandescent light bulbs, the doing away with, look, if you like LEDs, fine, great. Doesn't matter. You should still have the choice of whether or not you want to buy tungsten filament or not.
Yeah.
You should still have the right to have a company go out and make real tungsten filaments, as opposed to the purposefully doped, planned obsolescence one of the ones that we've been getting for the last 75 or 80 years, where they blow out the first time there's a voltage drop during a rainstorm, like here in Florida. It's crazy how bad all this stuff is. Like, there's absolutely no reason why this has to be this way. And that is literally going to free up investment capital into the United States in a way that, look, now you don't have to worry about the rules changing every 15 minutes because some third-class functionary at the EPA decided to change the rules because, they're a commie. How the hell do you invest as a, if you're a venture capitalist, if you're you're a hedge fund manager or anybody, how do you invest in any of this? Did we lose any of that?
Nope.
Okay. Because it looked like I was unstable for a minute. How do you invest in that? How do you how are you willing to start up a new company or get an idea for a better mousetrap only to have the EPA take it away from you later? You can't. And so I think the real second and third order effect of Chevron is that it could easily, and jarcossy, easily spark an investment boom into the United States that is immense. And then we start talking about permanent tax cuts. We start talking about all the other things that potentially can get done under Trump with coattails. Remember, one of the things I need to remind everybody of, again, I'm not a huge, I understand Trump for all of his faults and all of his shortcomings as a human being. Mm-hmm. But I don't doubt his loyalty to the United States, one, and I don't doubt his understanding of how capital works, two. His second, he may be a property developer first and a litigator second, because it's like somebody pointed out this morning that Trump's second favorite business is suing people. So my God, is he going to go after anybody who called him a convicted felon if they never sentence him, right? Because if he hasn't been sentenced by the judge, he's not a convicted felon. And so now every one of them is now opened up to slander litigation by Trump if they never sentence him, and that's now going to go away. But this, start to think about what happened in 2017. Trump never really had a majority. He had at least 4 to 6 rhinos in the Senate who would vote with the globalists. So he never really had a majority. He was always fighting a 47-53 Senate. Okay. He had a majority in the House, but he didn't have a majority in the Senate, and he wasn't going to get it. Oh, no, he didn't even have a majority in the House, right? Because Pelosi was friggin' speaker. So he had a minority government. And this time, if he comes in, there's no way he's not going to have coattails of the type and kind that would allow him and the people who are effectively backing him now to run the table. And that's why you're seeing the level of histrionics that we're seeing out of the left. That's why we're seeing we're seeing people like turn around and go, well, okay, that means that Biden can just assassinate Trump because, Biden's immune to prosecution for, any official act he takes as president. Sorry, last I checked, but under the enumerated powers of the presidency and whatever article it is in the Constitution, I didn't see murdering citizens as one of those enumerated powers. Mm-hmm. I know you people are communists and you can't read, but you might want to check on that. Run it by your lawyer. I know you got a guy for that. Like, seriously. Come on. Like every one of those people should be investigated by Merrick Garland's FBI. Are they going to be? Of course not. But that's, again, you're just building an even bigger case against, all of these people. And that's why the histrionics are so off the chart. They know that they have no other option but to continue doubling down until they're literally dragged screaming out of the room. Mm-hmm.
As we're talking about Trump and all of these things, how this is all playing out, you have had the privilege of having a couple conversations with our mutual friend Faisal about the Islamic Eschatological, which is a study of end times subject, and how he is kind of laying these tracing paper sheets over top of each other to really, get this understanding. And I would like to ask you if that is helpful to you in this situation, how much you find, let's say, value in it. And as well, before I let you answer, if there is anybody that has interest in covering the subject, please let me know because we can cover it more. But, this, through my conversations with Faisal about this, I find it very interesting because of this, this study of Gog and Magog, how all of these things wrap into everything we're seeing right now.
It's funny, Tom. When Faisal first started throwing this stuff out at me, he was his arguments were in very embryonic form, and he and I met last year before the conference, the evening we did with Alex Craner and Sean Newman up in Lloydminster, and Faisal came all the way across Canada to be honestly our personal chauffeur for a couple of days. And it was great. And he's a lovely person. And now he's thinking about stepping out from behind the curtain into the light. And he and I have talked privately behind the scenes about this as he's tried to go through what he's thinking on these things and how his thinking has evolved. And what I'll say is the following. I would be out over my skis in every way imaginable for me to say I know anything more than what has been presented to me. Okay, so I had a conversation with he and Crypto Rich and recently, and my bandwidth that day was pretty pathetic. So it was a difficult conversation to have. I urge everybody to listen to what he has to say about this and to try and make some sense of it. This is not I think he's on to something in terms of the way the eschatological imperatives, or at the very least, the eschatological teachings of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam may be being used to motivate people and grafted on a cynical political agenda. I think that's, if you, depending on where you want to be in this headspace, right? And again, I'm willing to engage with it. I'm not, saying no to it. I'm just willing to engage with it, right? And I've thought about this, and I'm like, the best way, like many things, is to use it as a filter and as a lens through which to watch, to view some of these events, and then to understand how it's being grafted and used, and then, make your own decisions about this that way. I think that's probably the most responsible way to think to consider it. And I don't think Faisal would disagree with me on this. Mm-hmm. But it is a very interesting subject, and it is a very I'm not trying to dance around it or anything. The point is that my expertise in this area is this deep, so therefore I don't want to talk about something authoritatively that I'm not an authority in. You know what I mean? That's not a good idea.
It is a very big subject to try to understand that takes a lot
Sure.
of nuance and discussion to be able to have, because a lot of these ideas are absolutely things that I've never been exposed to, but I'm doing my best to learn it, to understand it, and to try to, help bounce ideas back and forth through this, this small group of people that are talking about it, to try to be useful as well.
Right. And there's a lot going on there. And it's a fascinating way to look at all of this. It's like, we look at history through a lot of different lenses, right? We, depending on who you are, will depend on whose agenda, whoever's presenting you their version of history, they're revealing their agenda as they do it, right? Mm-hmm. So the best way to get a good, and this is something I've learned from Dexter White, because his background is in history, and he has to remind me every once in a while to not go down a too linear a path of if this, then this, if this, then this, if this, then that, because, I'm a scientist by training. I have that kind of logic system. As a matter of fact, there was a commenter on my blog this morning talking about this stuff, and he said, Tom, we're both chemists, and it's hard for us to see history, from a particular lens until we realize that life isn't the periodic table. And I'm like, yeah, it's like history is a messy thing. There's all of these facts, but then how those facts are assembled and presented reveal an agenda.
And by whom they're presented as well.
Sorry?
By whom they're presented as well. That's something that I've been learning a lot about lately.
Yeah. And my reply to him was like, no, you're absolutely right. And we as chemists have the Gibbs free energy equation to fall back on, and we don't have to and then we don't have to get messy after that. We just go to the Janif tables and get the Gibbs free energy equation, and then do the math, right? It's like, it's not that tough. And so yeah, it's a much different framework. And I think that, as I've tried to explain to people over the years, is like, I use Austrian economics to try and explain one aspect of this. I try to use, games theory on another angle. I try to use, I'll be honest with you, like all the Philip K. Dick and the Grant Morrison stuff, that all ties into eschatologically the same things. Dick was talking about all these things embedded deeply within his books. My favorite book of all time, he described Ubik. He's described as, just a simple retelling of the Bardathodal, which is the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I haven't read, by the way. But again, it's like there's, these things are, these are real big universal themes. These are real big universal stories, and all religious teaching, all archetypal storytelling, all major schools of philosophical thought are all attempts by humanity to tell the story of what's happening to us today, in order to be able to tell the future, oh, by the way, our future selves, oh, by the way, don't make the same mistakes we did. Mm-hmm. And so when you remind yourself to constantly boil everything down to that basic framework, it really then does open you up to go, now you can really be a scientist and go, okay, well, today our physics lecture is going to be, here's the boundary conditions of the problem, let's solve it. And here's our boundary conditions. We're going to write them up on the chalkboard, like it's a first semester physics class. And we're going to let X equal this and let Y equal that. And then we're going to run the scenario. It's not the truth. It's just the model. And then tomorrow we let X, Y, and Z equal slightly different things. And we run that model. And then we see and in history, you have to keep doing that over and over and over again until you get a thing. There's a great quote I always like to from Babylon 5, which is just a quote machine. That thing is literally it's a quote Bible, and it's history is a three-edged sword. It's my side, your side, and the truth, or something like that. And I think I'm even butchering the quote when I say it. But it's so very important that, that we keep that in mind, that we are not keepers of any one truth here. And it's why I push back on the now rabid anti-Zionism that's running around, not because I think Zionism is cool. No, I think Zionism is terrible. I think Zionism is even worse than most people who call themselves anti-Zionists are, right? I just don't want that to dominate the discussion, and then that freezes out every other aspect of the discussion. Because, look, power is power. The quest for power pushes across all ethnicities, all ideologies, all isms, all of it. And so people are people, and they can be seduced by the dark, and everybody can be seduced by the dark side. It's not tough, folks. So, that's just that. And then there's the reality of the world that you live in, is of what you are and what you aren't allowed to talk about explicitly without getting canceled. And we're sitting here a week after, or 2 weeks, or 2 or 3 weeks after Thomas Massie, who I've had criticisms of in some ways, went on Tucker Carlson, explained to the world that everybody in Congress has a handler at AIPAC, from AIPAC, telling him what to think. And then his wife shows up dead 2 weeks later. I don't know anything about Thomas Massie. I don't know anything about his wife's health and everything else. I got news for you. That looks awful suspicious to me. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, certainly, but the whole thing looks. I've stayed out of it, but you can see you can see it filtered through the zeitgeist. What do you make of that? So, I don't know what to make of that. I'd like to be able to make something of it. When I see Nancy Pelosi doing her normal song and dance, that I can identify that easily, right? When I watch Merrick Garland do his thing, or I watch even Putin do his thing, or Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer or anything else, these people never act out of type. You have a model for them, and they always just fit the model. Great. Doesn't make them the person. It just makes that your model of the person is more accurate than somebody else's model of the person,
and more useful. So
these things are very important to remind yourself of. But at one point, I'm going to be wrong about one of these things, or I'm going to continue to keep revising my models and keep refining them so that I can continue to, make good predictions and make good observations about what's happening in the world. Now, that being said, of course, there's always ability of you get so wrapped up in your own model that you miss this really big thing over here. And that's where having a broad spectrum of people like Faisal, like Dexter, like yourself, and all the people that I listen to, and my big, huge Patreon group, that's where you get to be able to crowdsource perspectives so that you can keep yourself from becoming too locked into one thing. And then myopia sets in, and you miss the forest for the trees, and you wind up becoming your own echo chamber. Because I want my echo chamber to be so big that there's not enough money in the world to buy it.
Absolutely. On that topic, Tom, one of the things that I found really interesting, and personally I was really trying to question and understand the timing of, was the Julian Assange thing that recently happened, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That seemed to me like almost, especially leading into the debate, it almost seemed like they used him. To me, I had the thought that they seemed to use this as a political pawn, right? A political move to, score some points maybe here or there. How do you read that situation?
It's really, really hard. I have a lot of conflicting thoughts about it. What I'll say is the following, and I know I talked about it a little bit on one of the market reports I did for the patrons. I won't begrudge Julian Assange finally just wanting to be out of jail and see his kids and live his life. I mean, in and of itself, dude, you did 15 years in service of the world. He cut a deal. Whether you agree with the deal he cut or you don't agree with that deal, that's up to you. That's your opinion. That's fine. You weren't the guy who lived it. when you've sacrificed everything,
Mhm.
then you get to make that call. You get to make that judgment with maybe a little bit more um, emphasis or weight or credibility than somebody else does. Was Biden and company trying to make themselves look a little bit better? Maybe they were trying to score some cheap political points. I don't know. Trump came out and said that he wanted to pardon Assange, but he wasn't allowed. Salt that the taste as well, right? Maybe at the end of the day, it was Assange was was finally let out because, look, the people who he most was going to harm are no longer going to be harmed by it, and he'd outlived his usefulness.
Mhm.
Or my friend Richard Poe just put out an article how the British created Julian Assange, and I don't know, I haven't read it yet, but that's the title of it, and maybe there's another angle on Julian Assange none of us have actually considered.
Mhm.
Like, at the end of the day, clearly he stepped on somebody's toes. Maybe Assange being let out is finally them saying, look, the person he's going to damage the most is Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton is now no longer a thing.
Mhm.
And then the Florida judge 2 days later or 3 days later turns right around after Chevron turns around and opens up all the Epstein files that have been locked down for 16 years. How does that happen? Like, there's a lot of winning here. And, like I said earlier, like oiling my liver, I can't, I don't know that I can, I can take that much, be it, that much rye whiskey or that many cigars or, hell, that many Reese's cups. Like, I can't at a certain point, like that's just too much, like,
Mhm.
So what are you going to do? I don't have a good answer for that, but the
Mhm.
timing is very suspect. And maybe this was a way of getting ahead of the game. I don't know. Or it could be written. I think Assange can be talked about from at least 6 or 7 different angles. And maybe somebody who knows more about this than I do is willing to weigh in and give us a better answer than what I just gave.
So, Tom, let's bring this all together by talking
Sure.
about what this ends up, probably for most of our listeners, what they want to hear, what this all ends up meaning for the markets, for gold, for, I know you're reasonably focused on Bitcoin as well. This, again, this idea that Vince Lancy puts out, this rise of mercantilism, this pricing power that has shifted to the East. What does all of this now tie into the tangible goods that we're all focused on?
The beginning of the great bull market in gold has begun. That's pretty obvious. And it has to be because in order to balance the debts of the world and in order to balance the scales between now East and West as we break apart into economic blocks, it's very clear that the East is remonetizing gold in order to settle up trade imbalances. That we're going back to settling trade imbalances in gold. We may not do it on a daily basis. We may not do it, we're going to have blockchains and digital assets like Enbridge and the unit and all that stuff that the BRICS are talking about. But that's coming. 40% weight and likely a 40% weight in gold. That's a remonetization gold, however you want to put it. And we get it. Then we get right back into Zoltan Poe's our commodities, your problem. If you want them, you're going to have the gold to get them. And God, is that guy brilliant? And so the big takeaway for everyone here is that in order, and this is, I think I'm cribbing a little bit from the Chris Marcus interview. I think it was Chris Marcus and the guy from Eagle Ford Capital. I can't remember his name. Talking about how all of this stuff in Enbridge. And he said, look, or Eagle Ford Gold. He said, look, the price of gold has to rise in order to be able to liquefy that market. It can't exist. It can't work at $2,400 an ounce. So it's got to rise. So there's a fundamental bid under the price of gold that the rest of the world wants. And the rest of the world is the rest of the world that has all the commodities. The West can continue to choose to try and price the world in overvalued fiat currencies relative to the price of gold in their currencies. But that's a losing battle. So to my mind, going all the way back to the first time I was on your Twitter spaces when I met Vince for the first time, and I brought up Judy Shelton's idea of gold-backed tips and all that stuff, which is what started the friendship between myself and Vince. Thank you for bringing Vince and I together, by the way. Vince is a house on fire, and he's unbelievably great resource and just phenomenal human being. And so we tie this all back to conversations we've been having for 2.5 years, right? That the U.S. has to remonetize gold in some way as well in order to fix the balance sheet. So what I've been thinking of is, and I go back to the things that Martin Armstrong has talked about in terms of where gold is going to wind up. And I think about Jim Sinclair, and I think about Jim Rickards. I think about all the 25 years that I've been studying this stuff. I'm like, it comes down to a simple renegotiation. At some point, we're going to decide the price of gold is going to rise to such a level that we're comfortable with allowing this much leverage within our national finances relative to the amount of gold we have in stock. And that leverage level is going to determine the final price of gold. Is it going to be 3-to-1, 5-to-1, 1-to-1, 10-to-1? I don't know, but it's not going to be 25-to-1 or 30-to-1 or 50-to-1 or whatever the hell we have it now. Moreover, now let's think about what Europe actually wants. Now, Europe has plenty of gold. If they actually were to act like responsible human beings and not try to subjugate everybody in Europe into a neo-feudalist system where the gold is abstracted away from the currency, but to actually embrace the fact that they have 14,000 tons of gold amongst all the central banks to liquefy the euro. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to do that because they never have wanted to do that. Because if they wanted, because they ran their operation after World War I to bankrupt Germany by revaluing gold at the pre-war rate, which extended the German depression after the hyperinflation of 22-23 in creating the rise of Hitler and creating and effectively in many ways helping to create the Great Depression across the entire East. Martin Armstrong wouldn't really disagree with me on this because it's really him I'm cribbing off of to like put all this together. And then after World War II, the Bretton Woods agreement kept us at the $35. You put the world on a $35 per ounce gold standard, radically overvaluing the dollar, which is what we then sent out to the rest of the world to rebuild the world after World War II and to fight the Cold War, which lasted until August of 1971, when gold convertibility had to be removed from the system. Our trade balance with Europe turned negative, which is why Nixon did that, because at that point gold would have been fleeing at an accelerated rate out of the United States. So he cut off gold convertibility, put us into Milton Friedman's nightmare of competing currencies, which is where we've been since then. And now that gold's been completely removed effectively from the Western financial system, we've got to remonetize the West. The East is trying to remonetize gold, and we're going to be forced to be dragged along with it. So now the question is, what is that going to look like? Well, I think like Vince has kind of convinced me on this, that everybody's going to look like China. They're going to have a closed capital account with a domestic currency and an international version of the currency. And that's going to happen for the dollar as well, folks. There's going to be an international dollar. It's going to be a domestic dollar. And one's going to be partially backed by gold, and one is going to be a trade settlement currency. And Europe doesn't want that, because what Europe wants is to defeat Russia once and for all, after they've been fighting Russia trying to get control of Russia for 300 years, fight Russia, force the United States to do it for them, fight World War III, defeat Russia, and impose on them the exact same situation that they imposed on Germany after World Wars I and II, which is to force an overpriced dollar relative to gold on them and strip mine all their assets. It's kind of what we did after the Cold War. Mm-hmm. And Putin put the kibosh on that in 2000. But Yeltsin had pretty much sold everything off to Bill Browder and company. Oh, there's a name I'm not supposed to invoke on YouTube. Bill Browder. Browder. It's like Haster. It's like a friggin' Lovecraft novel, for Christ's sake. That guy. Everybody go back to Bill Browder. Everybody go back to the Magnitsky Act. Everybody go back to Yukos and Kordakovsky and Berezovsky and all of these freaking people. It's all tied into the same damn thing. And Edmund Safra and First Republic Bank and Bank of New York Mellon and all of this stuff. It's all part of the same continuation of history. When you're finished with that, you realize that if you listen to the European government that they're trying to put in place in the EU right now, they all say the same thing. Russia must be destroyed. They must lose. They must pay reparations for Ukraine, and they must be broken up into 200 countries. Why? To do the exact same thing that they did to Germany. And they want to keep the price of gold down, and they're the only ones left, keep the price of gold down in order to affect that outcome to then destroy Russia and force onto them humiliating reparations that they have to pay back for the next 200 years. It took Germany 92 years to pay off their Versailles debt. They didn't pay off the last of their Versailles debt until 2010. Go look it up. Okay? This is Churchill's legacy, folks. Because Churchill was Minister of Defense during World War I, Chancellor of the Exchequer that overvalued gold after the Weimar Republic, hyperinflation, and the Prime Minister of Britain during the Battle of Britain. Like, it's all unbelievable. One of the worst figures in all of human history. So when you think about it, they haven't changed their game plan at all. And they're trying to fit this round peg into a square hole that's not going to fit. And they want the United States to do it for them. And what they've been doing since then is just running a demoralization campaign on the US and on Americans to hate themselves on July 4th. And they hate their country. No. I say no. Nuts to that. That's what's so wrong about all this. I'm not going there. That's what today means. That's why we're doing this on July 4th. Mm-hmm. Like, let's not do this. We fought a revolution against these freaking people to establish two things in the world that hadn't existed before. The full free banking, private formation of capital, a free banking system, and a government that was subordinate to their people. Never existed before in the Western world. We've always lived under tyranny of one form or another. And this has to be destroyed. And that's what they need to destroy that on the one hand, and they need to get all of Russia left, because all of Russia's wealth, because these people are locusts, they are colonialists, and they will not change personnelist policy. And so that's their plan. It's not going to work. Powell's hip to it. Judy Shelton's hip to it. I think Trump is hip to it. I'm hip to it. It's pretty obvious that this is what's going on, and everything else does not matter. And I've had people like tell me behind the scenes, they're like, how did he figure this out on his own? I'm like, because I'm not a moron. Because I can do math. Because I can assemble all these bits and just go, that's the through line. And because I've been obsessed by it for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe there's a little bit, I don't know. I mean, but that's
you have a board just out of camera view with all these different pieces on it that you can understand what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's easier to visualize that way.
It's just I hate to say it, it's just a hand to shadow fist, folks. How do I win? Can't win? Okay, next turn.
Yeah.
Can't win? Next turn. Okay, we'll figure it out. Eventually I'll win. Yeah. Christ. So I mean, there's a long digression to say there's going to be a negotiated settlement of the price of gold. I don't know where that number is. Mm-hmm. It could be $8,000 an ounce, it could be $12,000 an ounce, it could be $40,000 an ounce. I don't know what it's going to be. But the more we try to fight it in the West, the higher the number will go. How's that? And the same thing goes for Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And I think that Bitcoin and Tether at this point represent a mechanism by which to create a dollar stable coin, an international version of the dollar, backed by US treasuries, that allows Bitcoin to operate as a collateral asset for portion of the repo market. I think that's a very powerful situation. I think that's why we eventually had a lot of the ETFs to happen. They're selling off all of their Mt. Gox stock right now in order to push the price down. And Germany is selling all of their Bitcoins that they've stolen from their people over the years in order to, keep the price of their sovereign bonds from collapsing. That's what I think they're doing.
I saw that.
Bitcoin's,
I saw that Germany was selling Bitcoin. Why are they holding it? Why does Germany have it? I didn't know that.
Because the ECB is telling them to sell them in order to prop up the price of German bonds.
Well, that's fair, but where did they come from? Why did they decide
they seized them from?
Okay.
They've said. I mean, Merkel. There were a couple. I don't remember in exact moments, but I remember in the ether, in the before time, in the back of my brain here, I could probably find the incidents, but that I remember a couple of times where Merkel seized a bunch of Bitcoin from, a German exchange. She seized a bunch of it. So
because it's not a threat.
So yeah, in the before time, it's all back there somewhere.
Yeah.
So,
well, Tom, I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up. Obviously, an excellent and long discussion with many, many different diversions today. I do have one ask of you, though. You gave me, I wouldn't say you gave me some reading, but you mentioned Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand last time we were together in Alberta here. I remember texting you and telling you that I knew this book was so good because I was actually pissed off about it. So give us another suggestion for recommended reading here.
Oh God. At this point in time, and I did this on my podcast with Dave Collum. Dave's like, I don't like to read fiction because it's just so boring. You need to read Bug Jack Barron by Norman Spinrad if you want to understand the elites. And I mean that sincerely, if you want to understand the elites and the way it's like Spinrad was like either he was too close to the exact thing, like in California in the late 60s and just saw it all happening, or he was just visionary, which I think it's probably a little bit of both. That's one book. And I just the where media and immortality and the power elite all meet and explode. It's a brilliant book. Nigh on to blasphemous, by the way. So not for the faint of heart. It starts with never mind. I'll be honest, if you want a fun moment in time, and I mean this is a fun one. It's not one of Phil's best, but I think it'll give you an idea of just how I don't know how my brain works every once in a while. You should read Now Wait for Last Year. It's a very minor Philip K. Dick book from the mid 60s, but it'll give you some really interesting insights into Joe Biden and the way the power elite try to maintain the facade of power without actually having any legitimacy left. I think the plot of that book is hilarious. The book's I haven't read it in 35 years. I don't even remember if it's very good or not. But it is that the plot of the book is just hilarious. And I would recommend a couple of those like second tier Philip K. Dick novels, like that one, Clans of the Alpine Moon, which is a brilliant takedown on modern psychiatry and the CIA. No, really. And then of course, the old standby for me is, you need, and I think the last thing is, if you've never read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the book which Blade Runner is based on, I think you should read it because it's a very different book than the movie. And it touches on a lot of themes. It touches on a lot of things that the movie glosses over. And I'm speaking specifically about religion and eschatology and some things that I think are, and male ennui. I think that's really, really powerful for today. These books are so good even today. To give you an idea of what's going on. Let's start there. And if you're not really, and if you really want to get like weird, then, read The Invisibles, like go buy that. And then just let Grant Morrison tell you why the British crown has been evil for hundreds of years. So we'll go from there. Right.
And that's the thing, just to add a comment there on Atlas Shrugged, even though it is fiction, it is so, I think, instructive and informative to understand how these systems work, why they work the way they do, how incentive systems and humans work. And then, like I said, it is fiction, but I actually got mad at the characters.
I found, I think back on Atlas Shrugged now, I think back on the part that was the most engaging for me was the first half of it,
Mhm.
when she's setting everything up.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy about the resolution of Atlas Shrugged. As I put it in Lloydminster the last time, I'm a Dagny Taggart, and a lot too many people want to be John Galt.
Yeah.
I believe we should fight. I grew up. I tweeted out this morning. Somebody tweeted out the fate of all the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Who went to jail, whose children were killed, who died in combat, blah, blah, who died penniless, blah, blah, blah. And it reminded me. And I was like, as I was reading that, I'm like, okay, we're going to get to the one that there it is. And one of those in the list, the guy put out, was my best friend growing up. His mom was a direct descendant of Francis Lewis. And so that always stuck with me. They had the Declaration of Independence was important. I think so like, this is a big deal. Like the signing, like they signed the freaking document. And I grew up in the Hudson Valley, and this Revolutionary War is just everywhere. If you've never been to the Hudson Valley in New York, like, you just drive around, there are these copper plaques everywhere of where this battle occurred and where Washington made this camp and blah, blah, blah. There's all these symbols everywhere of the Revolutionary War. So we're steeped in it all over the place. Where I grew up, and these were like road signs. They were so much a part of the landscape, you almost forgot about them. And like, this stuff's important. And just to remind ourselves of we haven't sacrificed anything yet, folks, for this. And I think that's the next thing we need to really think about is, what are you willing to put on the table? And, we're not going to do it, but just getting control of our monetary policy, or just getting control of this, or just getting control of that. Like, it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take us saying, you know what? Yeah, we're just going to say no a lot. And then they're going to just have to stop. Mm-hmm. And eventually they'll run out of it, and then I go back to my chemistry training and say, look, if you sabotage if you pollute the solution with so much stuff that thieves the energy from it, you never generate enough activation energy to ever get,
catalyze reaction.
Catalyze reaction. And then the reaction just, you go, and then it dies. Mm-hmm. And this, you can think of the Great Reset that way. You can also think about our own willingness to actually, what did Edmund Burke say? The only thing the only thing that evil needs to advance is for good men to do nothing. So, are you a good man? Or are you willing to do something? Mm-hmm. What are you willing to do? Find something to do and do it. I do this. You do your thing. Faisal does his thing. Everybody does their thing. You find something that you can do to materially make the world a better place, and say no. And eventually, look, all of a sudden, we wake up one morning and we all said no, and didn't happen. Mm-hmm. So,
Tom, again, I want to thank you for, as always, an awesome conversation. You helped me make sense of the world and all of these seemingly crazy and random events. It helps be able to place them and understand where we are. For those that want to hear more of Tom, Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast, excellent Twitter follow at TFL1728. And of course, your blog, tomluongo.me, where you put out some of your writing that's not available on your Patreon. Tom, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
As always, Tom, have a great afternoon, and we'll talk again soon, my friend.
Absolutely. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.